They called him a hero once, but on that summer afternoon at Arlington, he was not thinking about medals or titles. He was thinking only about standing still. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrington was a tomb guard, one of the few chosen to protect the tomb of the unknown soldier. Under the blazing sun, he looked carved from stone. His navy blue dress coat was pressed so sharply it could cut glass. Brass buttons gleamed like tiny suns, and the white gloves gripping his ceremonial rifle never twitched, not even once. From a distance, strangers often whispered that the guards looked unreal, like living statues. Today was no different, but behind those dark sunglasses, Mike Harrington was alive, and painfully aware of every detail around him. The air carried whispers of tourists, the click of cameras, and the respectful hush that fell as the crowd gathered near the black mat where he paced. To them, he was discipline made flesh. To him, this was sacred duty. Yet that day, he was more than a soldier. He was also a father. Just behind the ceremonial rope, in the very front row, stood a little girl craning her neck to see him. Emily, 9 years old, her blonde ponytail swaying gently in the warm breeze. In one hand, she clutched a tourist brochure, folded and creased. In the other, her beloved stuffed bear, its fur worn soft from years of being carried everywhere. Her Aunt Grace rested a steadying hand on her shoulder, whispering gentle reminders. Don't wave. Don't call out. Daddy's working. Emily knew the rules. She followed them proudly because her father wasn't just any soldier. He was a tomb guard. And in her small heart, she believed he was protecting something bigger than both of them. Mike never turned his head, never gave a sign, but he felt her presence. He could sense her there like sunlight at his back. Years of training had sharpened his awareness until even the smallest shift in the air felt noticeable. He could feel the crowd's breath, their silence, their awe. What he couldn't feel, not yet, was the storm already moving toward them. 30 yards away, a police officer named Daniel Briggs was pushing through the crowd with a scowl carved into his face. And though no one knew it yet, the silence of that sacred ground was about to shatter. The sun hung heavy above Arlington, its heat pressing down on the plaza like a weight. The tomb stood silent, eternal, as it always had. But among the quiet reverence of the crowd, something darker was moving, something no one expected on sacred ground. Officer Daniel Briggs was angry, and when Briggs was angry, someone always paid for it. He had been a cop for more than 20 years, and he wore that experience like armor. Broad shoulders, thick neck, shaved head, jaw set so tight it looked carved from stone. But today his uniform looked less like a badge of service and more like a weapon he was itching to use. His lieutenant had chewed him out that morning over yet another excessive force complaint. His ex-wife had called again, demanding child support he didn't want to pay. And now here he was, babysitting tourists at Arlington. Watching families take selfies on hallowed ground felt to him like an insult. He needed control. He needed someone to remind that rules weren't optional. And then he saw her. A little girl in the front row, blonde ponytail glinting in the sunlight, rocking slightly on her toes to get a better view. Her stuffed bear dangled at her side, and in her small eagerness she shifted forward. Just half an inch, barely enough to notice. Her sneaker brushed past the braided ceremonial rope. It was nothing. A child's innocent move. No one else cared. No one else even noticed, but Briggs noticed. And in that moment all the fury simmering inside him found a target. Hey! The shout cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Conversations stopped. Heads snapped toward the sound. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. Emily froze. Her small hand tightened on the rope, wide eyes staring up at the officer now storming toward her. Aunt Grace bent low, whispering soothingly, her voice quick and urgent. It's okay, honey. Don't move. Just stay still. She didn't mean it, Grace said firmly, stepping between Emily and the officer. She's a child. She's behind the rope now. It's fine, but Briggs didn't care. His boots slammed against the marble stones as he closed the distance, each step echoing across the plaza. You think this is a game? His voice was sharp, cutting the respectful hush into pieces. You cross that line, you break protocol. Doesn't matter who you are. Grace raised her palms, protective now, her body instinctively shielding Emily. Officer, please. She's 9 years old. It was half a step. She's back behind the line, but Briggs wasn't listening. His eyes were hard, unblinking. His hand dropped to his belt, sliding down toward the yellow holster clipped at his hip. His thumb brushed the safety cap of his taser, And that's when Mike Harrington felt it. He hadn't moved an inch. He hadn't turned his head. But he heard everything. The harsh bark of Briggs's voice, the quiver in Grace's plea, the small gasp from his daughter. Every muscle in his body screamed to move. To break stillness. To run to her, but the rules were absolute. A tomb guard never leaves post. No matter the distraction, no matter the chaos, no matter what. Still, beneath the weight of those sacred rules, another thought roared louder than them all. If he hurts her? Mike's jaw tightened. Behind his sunglasses, his eyes stayed locked forward. To the crowd, he was the same, a statue of discipline carved from ritual. But inside, a storm churned. The air in the plaza shifted. Tourists, sensing the tension, went silent. A few phones began to rise, cameras blinking red as recording lights came on. The hush deepened, sharp and heavy, as if everyone felt the moment teetering toward something terrible. Briggs's voice snapped again, harsh and commanding. "Step back." Emily whimpered, her stuffed bear slipping from her hand. Grace tried once more, her voice breaking now. "Officer, please. She's just a little girl." But Briggs wasn't backing down. His boots struck the marble, shadow falling over them both. "Rules are rules," he snapped. With a sharp, practiced motion, he unhooked the taser from its holster, raising it in front of him. "Doesn't matter if she's 9 or 19. You cross the line, you pay attention when someone says stop." The crowd gasped. Mothers pulled children closer. Fathers muttered angrily. Phones tilted higher, capturing every second. And still, Mike did not move. His rifle stayed steady in his grip, his posture perfect. But his pulse hammered in his neck. His breath came slow and tight, forced into control by sheer willpower. That taser wasn't pointed at a stranger. It wasn't pointed at some unruly tourist. It was pointed at his daughter. And though the tomb behind him stood eternal and unyielding, Mike Harrington knew. His world was about to change forever. The air was no longer still. It trembled, like the moment before a thunderstorm cracks the sky open. Tourists shifted uneasily, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Some raised their phones higher, recording with the instinct that something historic or disastrous was unfolding. Mothers clutched their children, pulling them closer, as if the tension itself might spill over and strike them too. At the center of it all, 9-year-old Emily Harrington stood frozen. Her eyes were wide, her breath shallow, her tiny shoulders trembling beneath her cotton summer dress. The stuffed bear she'd carried everywhere since toddlerhood now lay on the ground beside her sneaker, abandoned in fear. The police officer's shadow loomed over her. Daniel Briggs had the kind of presence that filled a space, not with respect but with threat. His thick neck reddened, jaw tight, his lips curled back in a snarl that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with control. Grace, Emily's aunt, raised her arms in front of the girl, her voice trembling but firm. "She's a child," she said again, her words deliberate, her tone pleading. She stepped half a foot past a rope. "You've made your point. Put that thing away." But Briggs's hand was steady. The taser was leveled now, the twin metal prongs glinting faintly in the sunlight. His eyes narrowed, unblinking, locked on the small girl as though she were a hardened criminal. "I said step back," Briggs barked. His voice cracked through the plaza like a whip, slicing through the sacred quiet that normally wrapped the tomb of the unknown soldier. Emily whimpered, stumbling backward until she bumped against Grace's legs. She clung to her aunt's hand, whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear. Briggs stepped closer. He was beyond reason now, blind to the crowd, deaf to the pleas. He wanted compliance, obedience, no matter the cost. And 20 feet away, Sergeant Michael Harrington stood at his post, every nerve in his body screaming. He had trained for years to master the art of silence, of stillness. To lock his body into discipline so fierce that no distraction, no matter how loud, how dramatic, could pull him from duty. He had stood through thunderstorms, through jeering tourists, through the wail of crying babies. His posture had never faltered, his gaze never shifted. But nothing had prepared him for this. That was his daughter. His little girl, his princess. And the man in front of her was about to unleash electricity into her small body as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Mike's hands gripped the stock of his rifle tighter. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the sounds of the crowd. Sweat prickled along his collar beneath the pressed fabric of his uniform. His training, his oath, his identity screamed at him to stay still. To remain a guard, But his heart, his blood, his soul roared louder. Move. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd as Briggs raised the taser higher, his thumb sliding over the trigger. Grace shouted, panic breaking through her composure. Stop, don't you dare! Briggs's answer was silence, and the sharp pop of electricity crackling to life. The sound was hideous, a buzzing growl that filled the air like an angry hornet's nest. Sparks arced between the taser's prongs, a promise of pain. Emily screamed. That sound, it shattered Mike's world. It was high-pitched, raw, filled with terror, the sound of a child who believed she was about to die. And then the taser fired. 2 metal darts shot forward, trailing wires. They struck Emily's small body, embedding into her dress, sending volts of electricity flooding into her tiny frame. The scream that tore from her throat was unlike anything Mike had ever heard. It was primal, helpless, agonized. Her little body convulsed violently, legs buckling beneath her. The stuffed bear lay silent on the ground as Emily collapsed beside it, her limbs twitching, her face contorted in pain. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned to shouts. Parents shielded their children's eyes. Dozens of phones captured the horror, their lenses wide, their operators' hands shaking. Grace fell to her knees, hands scrambling to pull the wires from Emily's body. Oh God, no. Her voice cracked, frantic. And still, Sergeant Michael Harrington stood rooted. For the briefest, most excruciating moment, he did not move. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His mind fought to reconcile it. The sight of his daughter crumpling to the marble, the stench of burnt fabric in the air, the shriek still echoing in his ears. Something inside him broke. The rules ceased to matter. The centuries of tradition, the weight of ceremony, the code of honor, none of it mattered. Because in that moment he was not a guard. He was a father. Mike moved. The sound of his boot striking the black mat reverberated through the plaza like thunder. The crowd hushed instantly, 1,000 eyes snapping toward him in disbelief. A tomb guard never moved off post, but Mike Harrington did. Step after step, deliberate, heavy, unstoppable, he advanced toward the man who had dared to harm his child. His rifle swung slightly as his grip shifted, not ceremonial now, but ready. Briggs's face flickered with something, surprise, maybe even fear, but it quickly hardened back into arrogance. He kept the taser raised, its wires still trailing from Emily's limp body. Back off, soldier. Briggs spat, his voice cold. You're about to make the biggest mistake of your career. Mike didn't answer. His jaw was a steel trap, his silence louder than any words could be. Every stride carried the weight of a father's fury. Every step was a betrayal of his oath, but also the most honest act of his life. And as Emily whimpered faintly on the ground, her small voice barely audible, Mike's resolve sharpened into something unbreakable. This would not end with her suffering. Not while he was alive to stop it. The storm had broken. The silence of Arlington was gone, and the next moments would decide everything. His career, his honor, his freedom, maybe even his life. But none of that mattered, because his daughter had been tased, and her father was coming. The sacred plaza of Arlington had never seen such chaos. Where once silence reigned, now gasps, shouts, and frantic cries filled the air. Tourists pressed back, some dropping to their knees to comfort terrified children, others raising phones higher to capture what they knew would soon become history. At the center of it all lay Emily. Her small body twitched weakly, the wires still clinging to her dress. Grace sobbed over her, yanking at the barbs with trembling hands. The bear, once her constant companion, lay discarded in the dust, forgotten, and her father was moving. Each step Mike Harrington took echoed like a drumbeat, heavy, measured, unstoppable. His perfect posture remained, but the purpose behind it had shifted entirely. No longer a ritual of discipline, it was a march of fury. His rifle glinted in the sun, not as a ceremonial prop, but as the weapon it truly was. Briggs raised the taser again, this time pointing it directly at Mike. His lips curled into a sneer, his voice dripping with venom. Back down, soldier. You're about to assault an officer of the law. Mike didn't slow. His silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. The crowd seemed to feel it too. Their shouting dulled to a tense hush, the kind of silence before a storm destroys everything in its path. Briggs shouted louder, trying to mask the flicker of fear in his eyes. I said stop. One more step and I'll put you down. Still Mike came. His boots struck the marble like thunder, each impact a promise. His jaw was locked, his chest heaving, but his eyes, hidden behind his sunglasses, never wavered from the man who had dared harm his child. Emily whimpered. Just one word, weak and broken, Daddy. That sound shattered the last restraint holding Mike back. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance. The rifle swung to his side as his free hand shot out, clamping around Briggs's wrist with iron strength. The taser jerked sideways, sparks scattering harmlessly into the air. The crowd roared. Briggs tried to twist free, but it was like fighting a wall of stone. Mike's grip didn't falter, didn't even tremble. With a force that shocked everyone watching, he wrenched the weapon from Briggs's hand and flung it across the plaza. The yellow device clattered against the marble and slid out of reach. Drop the weapon. Briggs barked again, though now he was unarmed, his voice breaking with desperation. You're finished, Harrington. You're done. Mike's voice finally cut through the air, deep and calm but carrying the weight of thunder. You tased my daughter. The words weren't shouted, but they struck harder than a scream. Every syllable dripped with a controlled rage that silenced even the noisiest hecklers in the crowd. Briggs stammered, his arrogance faltering. She crossed the line. Rules are rules. Mike leaned closer, his grip shifting from Briggs's wrist to his collar. With one effortless motion, he lifted the man half an inch off his feet, his dress blues immaculate even as his fury poured out like fire. You don't touch a child. Ever. The crowd erupted, cheers mixing with gasps. Some shouted, "Hero!" while others cried shame at Briggs. Phones caught every angle, every second, the moment already spreading into digital eternity. Briggs thrashed weakly, but it was no use. The power dynamic had flipped. He wasn't the authority here anymore. He was the villain, exposed before hundreds of witnesses, and before the father who would not forgive. For a long, breathless moment, the two men locked eyes. One, a crumbling bully whose authority had slipped through his fingers. The other, a soldier who had broken the most sacred oath of his career, but for the noblest reason of all. Then, slowly, deliberately, Mike set Briggs back on his feet. His hand released the crumpled uniform collar, leaving the officer pale and trembling, humiliated before the crowd. Mike turned, his eyes falling to Emily. She lay weak in Grace's arms, her breaths shallow but steady, her small hand reaching toward him. And for the first time that day, Sergeant Michael Harrington's composure cracked. He dropped to one knee beside her, brushing a gloved hand gently against her cheek. I'm here, Princess, he whispered so softly only she could hear. Daddy's here. The crowd, the chaos, the shattered silence, all of it faded into the background. For that one moment, there was only a father and his daughter. But the storm wasn't over. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Reinforcements were on their way, and with them would come judgment. Not just for Briggs, but for Mike Harrington too, because a tomb guard had left his post. And though the world might cheer, the army would not forgive so easily. The wail of sirens shattered the air, drawing closer with every passing heartbeat. Red and blue lights flickered against the white marble walls of Arlington, painting the solemn plaza with chaos. The crowd shifted like a tide, splitting into two currents, those who fled to the edges in fear of escalation, and those who pressed forward with phones aloft, desperate to capture history unfolding before their eyes. In the center stood Mike Harrington, kneeling beside his daughter. His gloved hand rested gently on Emily's cheek, his rifle set aside but never out of reach. Her breathing was shallow, her little body still twitching from the lingering effects of the taser, each tiny whimper stabbed at his chest like a blade. Across from him, Officer Daniel Briggs staggered backward, his uniform wrinkled from being seized by the collar, his pride bleeding more than his body. His taser lay discarded yards away, powerless without its wires. But Briggs's rage hadn't dimmed. His eyes burned as he shouted, voice shrill and desperate. Arrest him. Do you hear me? He assaulted me, an officer of the law. The words rang hollow. The crowd booed loudly, their voices clashing in anger. You tased a child, someone screamed. Monster, shouted another. The plaza, once sacredly silent, now roared with fury. Briggs looked around wildly, realizing he was outnumbered, outfilmed, outmatched. But then the first police cruiser screeched to a halt at the curb. Doors flew open and uniformed officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouts cutting through the uproar. Hands where we can see them! The The command came sharp, directed not at Briggs but at Mike. The crowd erupted again in disbelief. No, not him. Arrest the cop who hurt the girl. But procedure didn't bend to the crowd. To the arriving officers, the scene was chaos. A fallen child, a soldier holding his rifle, and a furious cop screaming for backup. Mike rose slowly, his posture still as rigid as the ceremonial guard he had been only minutes earlier. He placed his rifle gently on the ground, raising both hands, palms open, as the circle of police closed tighter. Before Briggs could gloat, another voice cut in, calm but commanding. That's enough. The words came from Captain Sarah Monroe, the military police officer in charge of Arlington's security detail. She strode into the plaza, flanked by armed MPs whose presence carried a different weight than the local police. Her dark uniform bore authority not just of law, but of the army itself. Captain Monroe, Briggs said, latching onto her presence like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. You saw it. He assaulted me. He abandoned his post. He's dangerous. But Monroe didn't look at him. Her eyes swept over the scene, the discarded taser, the trembling child, the furious crowd, and the soldier standing tall despite it all. Her gaze locked on Briggs. Did you fire that taser? Briggs swallowed. She crossed the rope. She broke protocol. Rules are rules. Monroe's jaw tightened. The MPs behind her shifted slightly, their hands resting on their holsters. Then another voice rang out, steady, resonant, and damning. I was here, said Officer Doyle, Briggs's partner. He stepped forward from the sea of uniforms, his face pale but resolute. The girl barely brushed the rope. Briggs escalated without warning. He aimed at her, he fired. Without cause. The crowd exploded in agreement. Dozens of voices rose. That's the truth. We saw it too. Phones waved in the air like evidence, their cameras still recording. Briggs spun toward Doyle, betrayal flashing across his face. You're lying. But Doyle didn't flinch. His voice grew louder. No, you crossed the line, Briggs. You didn't just break protocol, you broke a child. Monroe's eyes narrowed. Her verdict was swift. Take Sergeant Briggs into custody. The MPs moved as one, seizing Briggs's arms before he could react. He thrashed, screaming curses, his face red with fury. This isn't over. You'll regret this, all of you. His voice cracked as they dragged him toward the waiting cruiser, his shouts drowned by the jeers of the crowd. For the first time since the chaos began, the tension eased. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into a roar of support. Strangers clapped Mike on the back. Others reached out to touch his shoulder to thank him. Parents pulled their children close, whispering about what they had just witnessed. But Mike didn't smile. He didn't raise a fist in victory. He only knelt once more beside Emily, brushing her damp hair back from her forehead. Her small eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy but aware. Daddy, she whispered weakly. I'm here, he said softly. I'll always be here. Monroe crouched beside them, her voice low enough for only Mike to hear. You know this isn't the end, Sergeant. There'll be questions. An inquiry. The guard doesn't overlook broken protocol, no matter the reason. Mike nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily. I understand. But in his heart, the decision had already been made. He would face whatever consequences came. Court-martial, reprimand, disgrace, it didn't matter. Because in that moment he was not a tomb guard. He was something more. He was a father who had protected his child, and no tribunal in the world could take that honor away. 3 days later, the silence of Arlington was replaced by the tense stillness of a military conference room. A long mahogany table stretched across the chamber, sunlight spilling through tall windows and reflecting off brass nameplates. At one end sat a panel of senior officers in immaculate uniforms. Their faces were carved from discipline, their posture a study in judgment. At the other stood Staff Sergeant Michael Harrington. His dress blues were pressed perfectly. His shoes gleamed like mirrors, and yet behind the polish there lingered shadows beneath his eyes. He had barely slept since that day. Colonel Whitaker, the presiding officer, adjusted his glasses before speaking. Staff Sergeant Harrington, he began, his voice calm but edged with authority. Do you understand why you are here? Yes, sir, Mike replied, his voice steady. Whitaker continued. You abandoned your post during ceremonial guard. You engaged in physical confrontation with a Metropolitan Police sergeant. You did so in full view of more than 200 civilians. many of whom recorded the incident. Are these facts in dispute? Mike drew a slow breath. No, sir. They are not. Then explain, Whitaker said simply. The words hung heavy. The panel leaned forward, waiting. Mike's throat tightened, but he didn't falter. Sir, my daughter, Emily Harrington, 9 years old, was assaulted by Sergeant Daniel Briggs with a taser. She was unarmed. She posed no threat. She stepped half a foot past the ceremonial rope. That was all. His jaw clenched as his voice grew firmer. I watched him fire 50,000 volts into her chest. I heard her scream, and I made a choice. A younger major at the table frowned. You understand, Sergeant, that tomb guards do not move. Ever. That discipline defines the post. It is absolute. Mike nodded once. Yes, sir. I understand. But there is a difference between discipline and blind obedience. There is a difference between protecting a symbol and protecting a life. The room fell into silence. Even the ceiling fans seemed to pause. Captain Sarah Monroe, seated among the panel, slid a folder forward. With the panel's permission, I would like to submit video evidence. Whitaker gave a curt nod. The screen at the far end of the room flickered to life. Civilian footage played in crisp detail. Emily stepping forward, Briggs shouting, the taser firing, her small body collapsing. Then the unthinkable. The tomb guard breaking stillness, moving toward his child, seizing Briggs. Even without sound, the footage radiated tension. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Whitaker removed his glasses, folding them carefully. His gaze fixed on Mike. Staff Sergeant Harrington. This panel has reached a decision. Mike's spine straightened instinctively. His hands clasped behind his back. There will be no court-martial, Whitaker said slowly. Your actions were extraordinary but justified under the circumstances. A faint exhale escaped Mike's lips, but he didn't relax. However, Whitaker continued, you will receive a formal letter of reprimand for abandoning post. It will remain in your record. Mike nodded once. Understood, sir. Monroe leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now. Sergeant Harrington, for what it's worth, any father who wouldn't have done what you did does not deserve the uniform. Mike finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no apology in them, no regret, only resolve. I'd do it again, he said quietly. Monroe studied him, then gave the faintest nod. I know. The panel dismissed him and Mike turned crisply, walking from the room. The doors closed behind him with a heavy echo. For the first time in his career, he carried not just the weight of discipline, but the unshakable truth that some rules are meant to be broken. And outside, waiting beyond the cold formality of judgment, was the small voice that mattered most. Daddy? Emily whispered, holding her aunt's hand, her smile faint but real. Mike knelt, drawing her into his arms. In that embrace, all the panels, protocols, and reprimands in the world ceased to matter, because honor wasn't found in the stillness of marble posts. It was found in the choice to protect the ones who couldn't protect themselves. The inquiry chamber had closed, the verdict delivered, but outside those walls the storm was only beginning. By the time Mike and Emily reached the parking lot, a sea of reporters had already gathered. Cameras flashed like lightning, microphones thrust forward, and questions rained down with the force of bullets. Sergeant Harrington, do you feel justice was served? Do you regret breaking your oath at the tomb? Was it worth sacrificing your career for one moment of instinct? How is your daughter recovering? Mike shielded Emily against his side, answering none of them. His silence spoke louder than words. He was a soldier, not a politician. But silence could not stop the tide. Within hours, the footage of Briggs's taser shot and Mike's explosive intervention had gone viral across the globe. Hashtags filled the digital world. Use Tomb Guard Father. Protect the innocent. Honor over protocol. News anchors replayed the clip on loop. Talk show hosts debated morality versus duty. Veterans called into radio stations, their voices breaking as they praised Mike for choosing humanity over rigidity. Parents posted stories of their own fears, their own children, their own desperate wishes for protectors like him. And yet, not all voices sang in his favor. One column in a major newspaper questioned his discipline, warning that if sacred traditions are broken once, where does it end? Others argued that the tomb was not merely stone and silence. It was a promise to the nation's fallen, and even love for a child could not justify breaking it. The country was divided. Mike had become more than a soldier. He had become a symbol, and symbols are always contested. That night, Emily slept restlessly in her bed, still trembling from memories of electric pain. Mike sat beside her, his large hand covering her small one, listening to every uneven breath. When she stirred awake, her eyes glassy, she whispered, "Daddy, are they mad at you?" Mike's throat tightened. "Some people are, but not the people who matter." She frowned weakly. "You left the line. You're not supposed to move." For a moment, the words cut deeper than any reprimand. But then Mike leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "You're right. I left the line. Because you were on the other side of it. And no line, no tradition, no order will ever come before you." Her lips curved into the faintest smile before she drifted back to sleep. The following morning, Mike was summoned again, not to a tribunal but to the Pentagon. The Army's leadership had been forced into the debate. Inside a towering glass room, generals, colonels, and advisors sat in tense discussion. At the center of the table lay stacks of reports, social media analytics, and printouts of headlines. The air reeked of politics. General Howard, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, gestured at the glowing screens on the wall. "This is not just an incident. This is a wildfire. Harrington has become a symbol. If we punish him too harshly, we'll be crucified in the press. If we honor him, we risk undermining discipline at the tomb. Either way, the institution suffers." Another officer chimed in. "The public wants heroes, sir. They see Harrington as one. Parents across the country are writing in, demanding recognition. His face is on posters, on shirts. He's already bigger than this room." Howard scowled. No soldier should ever be bigger than his duty. Yet even as he spoke, he knew the tide of history was already moving. The choice had been taken out of their hands. Meanwhile, at Arlington, tourists continued to gather. But the silence at the tomb of the unknown soldier felt different now. The image of the guard who had broken ranks for his daughter lingered like a ghost in every mind. Visitors whispered as they watched the current guards, their respect unchanged but now tinged with a deeper, more human understanding. On the edge of the crowd, veterans in wheelchairs saluted, not just for the unknown, but for the man who had proved that service was not only about standing still. A week later, Mike received an envelope. Inside was a letter, not from the Army, not from the government, but from a mother in Kansas. Her handwriting was shaky, her words raw. "My son died in Afghanistan. He was 22. I visit Arlington once a year and I know what that tomb means. But I want you to know, when I saw you leave your post to save your little girl, I saw my son in you. Because he too would have left the line for me. Thank you for showing the world that honor is not just marble and silence, but love and sacrifice." Mike read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper than the last. Then he folded it carefully, placing it inside his uniform jacket, closer to his heart than any medal he had ever received. But the storm still raged outside. Politicians began weighing in, some praising Mike as a national hero, others condemning him as reckless. Petitions circulated, demanding that he be awarded the Soldier's Medal for heroism. Others countered, insisting that no recognition should follow a breach of duty. Mike didn't join the debate. He didn't stand before cameras, didn't write op-eds, didn't defend himself online. He remained what he had always been, a soldier, a father, a man who had acted because he could not do otherwise. And every evening, when the house was quiet and Emily slept peacefully at last, he would step onto the porch, gaze toward the horizon, and whisper to himself, "I'd do it again," because the world could debate symbols, traditions, and rules for eternity. But Mike knew that on that marble plaza, when a taser cracked and his daughter fell, the choice had not been about protocol, it had been about love. And love, he believed, was the highest honor of all. Autumn's chill had crept into Arlington by the time the dust of controversy began to settle. The leaves around the cemetery turned shades of crimson and gold, drifting silently onto marble headstones. The season of change seemed fitting, for Mike Harrington's life too had shifted forever. The reprimand remained in his file, a permanent scar on his record. His future in the Guard was uncertain. Whispers suggested he might never return to the tomb, yet none of that haunted him. What lingered instead were the echoes of Emily's scream, the sight of her small frame crumpling on the cold plaza floor. But with each passing day, those echoes softened, replaced by the sound of her laughter. Slowly, painfully, Emily recovered. The bruises faded, her spark returned. One evening, she ran across the yard chasing fireflies, her giggles rising into the cool night air. Mike stood on the porch watching, tears stinging his eyes, not from sorrow but from gratitude. A month after the incident, Arlington hosted a public memorial. It was not for the unknown soldier this time, but for the ideals the tomb represented: discipline, sacrifice, and the humanity behind the uniform. Word spread quickly. The tomb guard father would attend. The plaza filled early that morning. Veterans wheeled themselves into position, their medals clinking softly. Families gathered, clutching small flags. Children sat on shoulders to see over the crowd. The very steps where chaos had erupted now brimmed with quiet anticipation. Mike arrived in his dress blues, Emily holding his hand. She wore a simple white dress, a ribbon in her hair, her smile shy but strong. As they stepped into view, the crowd stirred, not with noise, but with reverence. For the first time since the storm began, Mike allowed himself to speak publicly. He stepped to the microphone, the marble gleaming behind him. He paused, scanning the crowd, his voice steady when it finally came. "I am Staff Sergeant Michael Harrington. I was a tomb guard, and I am a father." The silence deepened, every ear tuned to him. "On that day I broke a sacred rule. I left the line. For that I accepted a reprimand. I do not ask for forgiveness because I do not regret my choice." He glanced down at Emily, who squeezed his hand. "But I want you to understand why. The tomb of the unknown soldier represents all those who never came home. But our duty, our true duty, is not only to the fallen. It is to the living, to the families who carry on, to the children who must grow up in the freedom those soldiers gave their lives for. That day my child needed me, and I chose her. Because honoring sacrifice also means protecting the ones left behind." A murmur spread through the crowd, some wiping tears, others nodding firmly. Mike straightened, his voice stronger now. "I remain proud of my service. I remain proud of the tomb, but above all, I remain proud to be a father who stood when it mattered most." When he stepped back, the plaza erupted, not in applause but in a single gesture more powerful than words. From the front row, an elderly veteran struggled to his feet. His hands shook as he raised them to his brow in salute. Slowly, others followed. Dozens, then hundreds, until the entire plaza stood with hands over hearts or salutes held high. A silent wave of honor swept across the sacred ground. Mike's throat tightened, his eyes burning as he returned the salute, crisp and sharp. Emily looked up at him, not fully understanding but sensing the gravity of the moment. She whispered softly, "They're not mad at you, Daddy, they're proud." In the weeks that followed, the media frenzy faded. Politicians found new battles. Social media moved on. Yet the image of that salute remained etched in memory, replayed in countless hearts. The tomb guards continued their watch, stepping with precision, rifles on shoulders, the marble plaza once again wrapped in silence. But among visitors, the story of the guard who broke ranks lived on, passed in hushed whispers. Parents pointed to the rope and told their children, "Do you see? That is where a father proved that duty and love can exist together." Mike never returned to the line. His career took a quieter path, away from the ceremonial spotlight. But he carried no bitterness, because he knew, just as Emily knew, that his truest post would always be beside her. Years later, when Emily was older, she asked him, "Do you miss it, Daddy?" "Standing there guarding the tomb?" Mike thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember, the tomb belongs to the unknown. You, Emily, you are my known. And you'll always be the one I guard." She hugged him tightly, her arms around his neck, whispering into his shoulder, "Then I'm the luckiest girl in the world." And in that quiet embrace, away from the marble, the crowds, and the judgment of history, Mike found his final honor, not as a soldier, not as a guard, but as a father whose greatest duty had always been love.